Hello, UCAR. Peter Christensen here, coming to you from the CEO's desk. Part 3 of our journey through these new forms changes and new form. So, wanted to continue from last week's, but added another layer onto it. So, same scenario. Buyer and seller under contract, $10,000 worth of earnest money. Section 2.2, subject to sale, is checked yes. 8.3B1 of the Rep C says $5,000 is at risk. Financing appraisal deadline August 15th, settlement deadline of August 25th. All right? They use a subject to sale addendum, the UAR subject to sale addendum. So that's in there, creating, as we talked about last week, a separate right for the buyer to cancel based on certain circumstances. But this time, seller throws in there the option to keep property on market time clause addendum. So the time clause addendum is in there. Now, as you look at that, this is recently revamped. On section B, 1B, finance, the third checkbox is checked. So finance and, if applicable, subject to sale of buyer's property condition. So these are the conditions the buyer agrees to remove if the seller gets a backup offer and then notifies the buyer of that. And the buyer is given 2 days. So 2 days is written in. That's a big change in this form. It's no longer calculated by hours. It's by days now. So 2 days is in that in the time clause addendum in section 1B, and then finance and subject to sale of buyer's property are the conditions the buyer agrees to remove. C of that addendum, which asks for additional earnest money, has $2,000 written in there. So $2,000 additional earnest money. Okay, so they're going along. Everything's fine. Seller gets another offer and notifies the buyer on the 10th of August. So remember, buyer has 2 days to agree to the terms of the time clause addendum. So what options does buyer have at that point? Let's say buyer's property is under contract. So buyer's home is under contract. Things are looking good, but it's not closed yet. Well, buyer has a couple choices. Buyer can cancel using the subject to sale contingency, and that's fine. And in that case, buyer would get the whole $10,000 back, regardless of the timing, as long as it's before that finance and appraisal deadline, right? What's the other option? So buyer can then remove the finance and subject to sale contingencies, and on top of that, we'll have to pony up another $2,000 if buyer wants to continue. Those are the terms of the time clause addendum that they agreed upon. So those are the two options the buyer has. So let's say buyer decides, I'll risk it, right? Things are looking good on my sale, the sale of my home. I don't want to lose my opportunity to buy this home, so I'm going to risk it. Now, does the buyer have to show that it will close? No. Buyer simply has to take that risk, right? And that's why the seller can ask for additional earnest money. So let's say goes forward, and then on the 13th, buyer's sale falls through on the sale of buyer's home. Suddenly buyer's now looking at, oh shoot, I've got to try to close this deal without the benefit of closing on my own home. And buyer can't do it. What are buyer's options then? Well, buyer's actually kind of out of options if they're past the due diligence deadline. Now, if you remember, the finance and appraisal deadline was on August 15th. It's only the 12th or 13th. So the 13th, so the buyer should have 2 days to use that finance deadline. Not in this case. Why? Because buyer used the time clause addendum and seller notified buyer of a backup offer, and buyer agreed to remove the conditions of the contingency of finance and subject to sale of properties of buyer's property. That makes it so that option is no longer available, even though they're within the deadline. They have removed that contingency. So buyer is looking at really defaulting on the sale and now has $12,000 of earnest money at risk because the $10,000 initial deposit and then an additional $2,000 asked for it by the seller in the time clause addendum. So hopefully you can see how this time clause addendum really kind of evens the playing field, or gives the seller the opportunity to even the playing field here. Because, yeah, the option or the subject to sale addendum gives the buyer a lot of rights. Up to the finance appraisal deadline, they can get all their earnest money back. But the option, the time clause addendum, gives seller a way to say, okay, but if I get a backup offer while I'm waiting for you, then now I've got more rights. And if buyer, you decide to risk it going forward, seller can protect themselves with option C, section C, 1C on the time clause addendum by adding additional earnest money in there. Hopefully that helps. If you like this video and you want to see the others, you can check out our YouTube channel. There's also a comprehensive video overview of all these new forms and the changes that you can watch as well. Remember, this is not legal advice. This is legal information only. If you need specific legal advice, please contact your attorney. Thanks for checking in.